Welcome to the All Access Podcast from the experts at Tevis. Each episode, we'll talk about technology topics, trends, or solutions that manufacturers need to know in today's rapidly evolving times. Sit back, enjoy the discussion, and let us know what you think.
Hey, welcome. This is the All Access Podcast. Thank you for joining. I am your host, Michael Thiessen, and I'm coming to you from our studio office at Tevis America. Hey, I got to really say we have an awesome episode for you guys today, and I think you're going to be really enjoying this, and you're also going to be enjoying our guest that we have, because she's going to bring an awful lot of information to this particular topic. I got to start off with this. This topic is affecting all of us, not just in the manufacturing industry, but in any industry that we're dealing with right now, because it's impacting us. And the item that we're talking about is our economy. What's going on with this? How is our manufacturing being impacted, especially our mold and die makers producing all of our goods from the automotive sector, as well as the machining and the manufacturing sector? And we're going to look at this trend, what's right now going on, and hopefully we can give you some information or some items that you may not know. And obviously, as we have in every single episode that we have done, we have an expert to this. I'm really excited to have Miss Cara Walton on from Harbour Results. If you don't know Cara yet, she's the director of Harbour Results, or the Harbour IQ team. Now, Harbour Results, what they do, they are a consulting company specializing in the manufacturing sector. They're collecting and analyzing dozens and dozens and dozens of data in order that we in the manufacturing area have all the information in order to make sound decisions moving forward. So we at our team at Tevis, we were thinking, you know what? Who can we ask that probably knows the most about this particular topic? And of course, right away on the top of the list, Cara Walton comes in. With that said, Cara, welcome to this episode.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I'm excited to be here and share my 2 cents on the economy and what we think is happening. And as you said, obviously its effect on manufacturers, and most specifically our tool and die community that we both know very well and spend a lot of time in.
Right. I mean, you and I have talked on many occasions on a lot of the different conferences. I've seen you present on the OESA conference as well as Harbour Results and multiple items. And I mean, you really have your finger on the pulse of what's going on for now many, many years, for as long as I know you at Harbour Results. Give us a little bit of an idea of what do you see at Harbour Results right now happening in our economy?
Yeah, that's a great question and a good starting point. So I think from our perspective specifically, it's kind of an interesting dichotomy that we're playing with right now. I talk to a lot of people all the time who tell me they think the economy is booming. It's doing really well. And then I also talk to a lot of people who will say, well, I really have cause for concern. I'm not sure it's in a great position today. And I think if you watch it from our perspective at Harbour, with all the data that we have that we're analyzing that you talked about, really both groups of people are right. Frankly, from a broad economic perspective, we're not sitting in a very comfortable position, and we can talk more about why that is. But what's happening and what's so interesting about manufacturing specifically is that demand for all of the goods that our manufacturers make and our molds and dies ultimately produce the parts for is really healthy. So it's a very interesting situation today where I can sit here and say, well, I'm really concerned about the macro economy, the big picture stuff happening globally and here in the States. But simultaneously, there's really strong demand out there. So it's an interesting situation to play in. And the reason why it's so fun for me and our organization is because I get this opportunity to study all of these macro forces. I read way too many reports from the Federal Reserve. I talk to them consistently, things of that nature. I'm sure that would bore most people. I think it's pretty cool. But then I also get to take all that macro data and take all of our information that all of the tool and die suppliers and their customers provide to us to kind of see what's happening in this dichotomy. So from my perspective, I think it's a positive story for manufacturing, but there are absolutely forces at play that we have to be aware of that frankly are out of our control, right? Whether it be inflation rates, interest rates, what's happening from a federal deficit perspective, all these kind of things that we have to watch closely. So that's kind of my initial take, if you will.
So if I would be, and probably our listeners are in the mold environment, the dye environment, and all of this. I mean, from what I'm seeing right now, from a lot of our clients that we're dealing with, they're extremely busy right now. I mean, a lot of the mold and dye shops are probably fuller than they have been over the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years. And so if I look at I'm going to say local economy, not just the manufacturing sector, and seeing what's all going around it. Of course, one may think, okay, what do I do now? Do I invest in new machinery? Is this a great time to do this investing and getting prepped for the next year? Because we're now figuring out, okay, what's our automotive big threes are going to be doing? Are there going to be more programs coming up during the OESA conference that we just had just a little while ago? I mean, there's a change happening. I mean, we're going from vehicles that are combustion vehicles over to battery electric vehicles. So there's this change happening. How is that going to be impacting our mold and die makers?
Yeah, I think, I think the top line answer to that question is that it's overall a positive impact, right? It's going to have some good stuff, but there's a lot of things for us to watch within that. I agree with you. Everybody that I talk to consistently and all the mold and dye shops that I'm in, soon to be in Canada again, which I'm excited about because I haven't crossed the border in a while.
Amen. Yes.
Right. I think we'll get there soon now. But the big thing that's happening for a lot of them is they're very busy. And I think the first thing for us to understand is a couple of reasons why. A portion of that is because for a period of time in 2020, there were some things that weren't happening, right? So we had a lot of engineering staff that was furloughed, things like that. So even programs that were expected to launch in 2020 from an automotive perspective, some of them didn't launch, right? Because either we didn't have the engineering staff to do so, or there was a company that didn't have people deemed as essential employees. A lot of reasons and challenges that we faced throughout 2020 that prevented some of those vehicles from launching. But we all know we've worked in automotive for long enough. Just because they had challenges to launch them in 2020 doesn't mean that OEM isn't going to launch the vehicle. So part of the increased demand and busyness today is because we have some vehicles that didn't launch or maybe were won in Q4 of 2020, but as we all know, it takes more than a couple weeks to build a tool. So they're actually being built into 2021. So I think that's a portion of it, right? Is they're just busy today from that perspective. But the broader thing that's happening from a busyness perspective, and the reason why we're so busy is because we have a huge increase in this demand, not only to your point about the increase from battery electric vehicles that are coming out into the market, which are consistently happening today, but also across all industries. So if we think about it from a broad perspective and how that affects manufacturing, we had a lot of things we weren't allowed to spend money on last year. Like we weren't allowed to go on lavish vacations to Europe with our families. Maybe we went up north in an RV, but that's quite a bit cheaper than 4 tickets to Germany, right? We also didn't do things like throw big weddings. I know my sister got married in a wedding of 20 people, and my parents' bank account is very thankful for that, because if it was 200 people, I think they'd be paying a little bit more money. And the gist here, the reason why I'm calling those things to your attention is because we as consumers didn't stop spending money. We just didn't spend it on those things. So we spent it on new cars, on new appliances, on boats, on RVs, on all that kind of stuff. So that drove nearly a 30% increase in demand. I obviously have the chart, but I won't put it up because it's podcast, so I can't. But we have almost a 30% increase in demand. So what that's done is that's increased tool demand today. Because as we all know, when we have more demand for goods, we ultimately have to refresh those goods and make sure that we're giving the consumer what they want, new tooling, especially new molds. And then that's also playing a huge role in this electric vehicle piece that you're talking about. So we have 2 things at play today. We have ICE, so internal combustion engines, that absolutely still have to be launched. They have to be refreshed. Our term at Harbour, although probably slightly blunt, is that it's called prettying the pig, right? So we're not necessarily trying to do something brand new on a vehicle. We're just trying to make the lighting a little bit better, maybe make the screen on your IP a little bit bigger, things of that nature. All of that drives new mold spend. So we have to keep doing that on an ICE, and we also have to launch all of these electric vehicles, which if you look at forecasts even 4 or 5 years ago, all of those were forecasted to start launching in 2021 from a tool launch perspective. So when I talk about that, I mean 18 months pulled back from start of production. And that's part of why we have such a positive outlook going forward that, look, we're just starting to launch all these electric vehicles. We have a lot more that are coming. And then we also still have to make sure that ICEs are being refreshed because people don't want to all buy an electric vehicle yet. So what that tells me and what that tells our organization is that there's a really strong demand forecast out there for tooling. But what we don't have is strong labor in the industry to help us with that. So to your point about investing, it's a great opportunity for additional investment right now, and frankly, more necessary than it's ever been because we have this crazy demand. We have a 30% increase for some people in their businesses, but we don't necessarily have the people to do the work. So that leads us to one solution most of the time. Well, two solutions. One of them, just get more efficient in your businesses, which there's always opportunity for improvement. But the other thing that probably comes with is increased investment. You may have to buy more robots. You may have to have more machining cells. You may have to design differently because you don't have as many designers as you used to. All of these things at play that are going to drive us to have to invest more in the next year to 2 years to prepare ourselves for this consistent increase in demand going forward.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on so many interesting points. I mean, the labor pool, the automation, and I'm going to circle back to all of those again. But I want to focus on one of the things. I want to get your thought on this. About 4 years ago, I flew back from Germany, and I had the pleasure of having somebody sit beside me that's in the automotive industry, especially in the industry of, and I'm not going to say the name here, using lenses more, cameras more, instead of using rearview mirrors and all of that kind of stuff. And during our conversation, what was said was that the future is that more and more of our rearview mirrors are going to be replaced by lenses. And then I saw just not too long ago, Lexus and their new flagships or in the new vehicles using more, I don't even know what the correct term is, but using hand gestures to move your seats back and forth and stuff like this. So what are we doing here? We're replacing buttons that have been molded before, where I needed to have molds and tools and all that kind of stuff for, with digital entities. So of course, our mold production or die production will be considerably reduced. Do you think that's going to have a huge impact on some of the amount of tools that a mold maker is going to be able to count on in order to survive?
Yeah, I think it absolutely will in some capacity, but there's a couple of things that play within that, right? There is absolutely some reductive design happening, to your point. I know I was driving a BMW X5 a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a big hand talker. And I was on the phone with someone, and I was moving my hands around and didn't realize that the car was trying to turn the volume up and down based off my hand gestures. So that was a little weird. But you're right. It absolutely is starting to drive a little bit of that situation where we have more reductive design. But I can also tell you there's still a lot of buttons in those vehicles, right? We still need buttons to roll the windows down, and we still need a lot of plastic when it comes to framing out all of these screens, because now most cars have 3 or 4, and we still need air vents and things of that nature. And then obviously with electric vehicles, we also have a lot less from a black plastic perspective, but we also have battery trays and things of that nature. So there's still a lot of mold demand. Die demand, I think there will be a lot of die demand more in the short term as we have dual platforms, but there's potentially going to be a reduction in some of that die demand going forward, because frankly, we're going to try to have one chassis, if you will, and then have a bunch of different options on top of it. So inherently is going to decrease some of our steel demand. But I think that's not an overly strong concern today because of the number of trim levels we have. So even if we have a 20% net reduction in buttons in a vehicle, right, because of all the things that you're talking about, we may have an increased number of trim levels. And frankly, we do for a lot of vehicles for at least the next 5 years, because we have to launch electric vehicles that are only coming out with 1 or 2 trim levels, but while still simultaneously keeping all the trim levels on our internal combustion engines. So I do think it's something to watch closely. I think especially if you're someone who is only sitting in the very small mold market, specifically on things like buttons and door handles and things of that nature, it's something to be aware of. But it's not necessarily cause for concern immediately, because there's still a lot happening in these vehicles. And frankly, the other thing to your point about evolution is, as we get more into autonomous vehicles, which is obviously much further down the road than electric vehicles, a lot of people bucket them, but they shouldn't be bucketed, right? They're two very separate things from a innovation perspective. But when we do get to that point, which will happen, we're also going to have an increase in plastic demand because we're going to have more people who want their own individual cells. Like if you think about flying first class to Germany, we're talking about Germany. So we're flying first class to Germany. Think about the number of buttons I have inside my little Delta One area with my own headset, all that kind of stuff. Once we have autonomous vehicles at some capacity, we're going to need all of that in the vehicle as well. That's going to be the expectation that your consumer has. So it'll ebb and flow as all things with mold demand and plastic demand do, but I don't think it's too much of a cause for concern today from a reductive design perspective.
Mm-hmm. Well, certain items are going to be replaced by others, and there's going to be an opening for some new technology that requires some new molds or new dies in order to replace this. My son works in the steel industry, buying steel for the automotive, and I've got a daughter just entering in the plastics industry. So I've got both genres kind of covered on the molds as well as on the dies for steel. And the interesting aspect that we're seeing also in our clients in the mold and the die industry is the problems that all the mold makers or the die makers are running into. So, I mean, the die makers have these steel issues, the amount of steel that is available. And while on the plastic side, we have the resins and all that kind of stuff that is on short demand. Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel that we're going to have more resins available so it's not going to have this downward turn in the plastics industry or even the die industry in terms of the steel?
Yeah, I would love to say absolutely. It's going to be great. I'm sure that would make a lot of people happy, but I unfortunately don't think that we can say that. From our perspective at Harbour, and we listen to a lot of other experts, to your point, in the resin side as well as in the hot rolled and cold rolled steel side, so less on tool steel, it's probably not going to end until at least the second quarter of 2022. And part of the reason why I say that is because there's, you know how with all things macroeconomic, it's fun to talk about why something is occurring today, and then that allows you to forecast for the future as to when it ends. A big thing that a lot of analysts love to do. Part of the reason why I say that it's probably not going to start to subside until at least the second quarter of next year is because what put us in this situation today is more than just the effects of COVID-19, right? So there's this sentiment in the industry that once COVID kind of figures itself out, and now that we're decreasing from the Delta variant, more people are vaccinated, we have positive things happening from that perspective. In theory, that means that the supply chain problem should be solved, right? That's the logical next step. But the reason why that's not happening is because there's a lot more that drove our supply chain challenges than COVID-19. If we all remember the Suez Canal blockage, that had nothing to do with COVID and had everything to do with we have too tight of a canal that we're trying to get massive ships through that the entire global supply chain relies on. That drove a huge wrench into it. We had all of these natural disasters that threw huge wrenches into our resin producers and resin distributors, as well as the steel side of things, right? So when you have hurricanes and you have wildfires in many of the areas where a lot of our resin and steel comes from, that's going to make it really hard to get these things. So I think, unfortunately, because we had so many more factors at play than just COVID-19, it's making it a longer period of time until we're potentially going to start to see relief. Now, I do think that some things will start to be relieved a little bit more in the first quarter. We might be able to take a little bit more of a breath and have slightly more availability from a steel perspective, specifically with what's happening with the tariffs in Europe. But overall, it's going to be a long process, right? We're not going to be able to wake up on Saturday morning and say, oh, the supply chain challenges are solved. Let's go back to business as usual.
I wish.
I know, me too. It'd be a great Saturday. I'm sure we'd all be having a mimosa at breakfast, but that's not going to happen.
I think you're spot on with it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, our supply chain definitely has been weakened. I mean, I think COVID was a magnifier for a lot of things. I mean, if I take a side cut onto what you already mentioned earlier with the labor issue, COVID magnified that all of a sudden now we have a shortage on labor. And it's not like that this particular situation is a newsflash. We've had that for years and years and years where we didn't get new growth in the industry. And to what you had mentioned before too, we have a lot of, and please excuse me for saying this now, a lot of old white guys or white-haired guys in the position still. And you know what? They're going to be retiring here very soon, which means a lot of the experience now goes with them. I had the pleasure of talking to some of our friends that you know well with James Ritchie and talking about the Industry 4.0, and also with Julian O'Day talking about the labor issue. And that is a really scary item that we're having, is not having enough labor that's coming up that has experienced.
Right.
And that adds to all of the other issues that are brewing in there. And I'm going to call it, it's almost like this perfect storm. Everything is now impacting the manufacturing sector. And there's not one mold or die shop that I haven't gone in yet that there's a sign outside that looking for CNC programmers, operators, this, that, and the other. And everybody's looking.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a big problem.
I think it's a huge problem that we need to somehow solve. And I know, being in some of the conferences with you before, there needs to be almost a reprogramming of our manufacturing sector, where we have to diversify ourselves a little bit more, and where companies need to look at utilizing very talented women. I mean, I've got a wonderful daughter that's going into this male-dominated industry. She's incredibly brilliant, and she has just landed a job with one of the companies in Louisville and starting her career. And those kind of thoughts need to be done if we're running into the labor shortage. And doing this, we need to invest into a lot of the different areas.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this perfect storm that you're talking about. I think from a labor perspective, there's a couple, I'm not going to say easy solutions to the problem, because this, to your point, the labor problem is not going to be solved quickly. But there are some things that we can do as an industry pretty swiftly that would allow, to your point, potentially some increase in diversity, and also just increase the number of applicants for positions. At the end of the day, right, everybody who's listening to this podcast, and you and I, we're running businesses, we're trying to hire people, and we need qualified applicants to choose from. The bottom line is that's what we need, right? We need to be able to hire people who either have the skill set or have the propensity to learn the skill set that we need for them. So I think there's a couple really easy solutions to the problem, at least initially. One of them is, to your point that you brought up, you haven't walked into a tool maker who hasn't had a sign out front that says CNC programmer needs to be familiar with NX and some other software, right, in order for them to even apply for the position that we need available right now. They need to know Tebis really well. They need to do all these different things in order to apply for the position. Otherwise, don't even bother, right? We've seen those signs. We see them all the time. That's not doing a whole lot of anything anymore. You and I both know that every single person who is seasoned in those things that the average tool maker needs has a job right now, and probably also already has 2 other tool suppliers who have said, we'll offer you $1 more if you come down the street to us. That's what's happening in today's market. So I think we're kind of doing ourselves a disservice by putting a sign out front that says you need XYZ. Partially because that's not going to work, because those people already have a job, right? That's how short supplied we are in the tool industry. But also because you have a huge group of people who are going to see that sign and aren't even going to consider it, just because they don't know what you mean. So for example, when I was in college, to your point about getting more women into this industry, if I had driven by a tool supplier and they had said that they needed someone to work in design, I would have said, well, I don't really know what that means. I'm not going to apply for that job. All the while, what I don't know is that if I had gone into them and said, I grew up in the manufacturing industry, I'm intuitive, I'm capable of learning, I'm really good at math, and by the way, I'll work really hard, and they're going to look at me and say, great, we'll give you a job with huge amounts of upward mobility. You can work in really cool softwares today. You have the ability to cross-train in X, Y, and Z and all this kind of stuff, that they probably would have given me a job and I probably would have loved it. I'm not going to know that from that sign, right? So the first thing that we have to do is be more strategic in how we're listing open positions. What are you actually looking for as a tool supplier? Are you looking for someone who's good at learning and who maybe is really good at playing video games or understands process really well because they worked in the restaurant industry and they get that? Okay, then maybe we need to list that instead of someone who's able to run a 5-axis machine.
But in the past, mold makers and die makers, it wasn't exciting. I mean, there were grungy places, dark, oily, long hours, and there's no. I don't see the marketing where you really are making this super exciting, because most mold shops that are now walking into, they don't have that stigmatism anymore. They have new technology, they have newer machines, they're utilizing the latest technology, but when it comes to attracting talent or attracting individuals, there's not that excitement that says, you know what, it's the best time to enter in this environment of manufacturing. And I think that's missing a little bit.
I agree. I think that's because it's not out there today. And part of the reason why it's not out there today is because manufacturers haven't historically had to do that, right? Especially in the tool and die space. So you and I talked about this, I think last week or a few days ago, that unfortunately what happened from a labor perspective is that we came out of 2008 and 2009 and no one was hiring. And that's when this new, quote unquote, new generation that the tool and die community isn't doing the best job of hiring. By that, I mean millennials and people under the age of 35. That's when all of those people are coming out of school. So intentionally, mold and die suppliers weren't hiring because they were coming out of 2008 and 2009. So they had bigger fish to fry, if you will, than trying to bring 3 new people on board. They were trying to make sure their businesses were staying afloat. But what that did is that prevented us from understanding how to hire into this generation. And to your point, understand how to market to them. So now we're almost playing a little bit of catch up to say, okay, we have to market that you can work overtime if you want to and get paid really well, but it's also highly acceptable to work a 40-hour week. You're going to have opportunities for upward mobility. We're going to pay for your apprentice program potentially, or we're going to do tuition reimbursement for you. And you're going to have the capability to learn all about this wonderful industry and work on multi-million-dollar machines and machining centers. And frankly, it's going to be pretty awesome. But we have to figure out how to market to that group of folks in a way that we never have before. And I think a couple of the ways to do that, number one is to talk about what you're saying, right? It's to get people into the plants. It's to get people to understand that, look, the way that you imagine a tool and die maker 20 years ago is not what's happening today. I mean, frankly, the floors of some of the mold makers that I walk into are cleaner than the floor in our office park in Southfield, Michigan. Like, we got crazy awesome stuff happening in all these tool suppliers. And the other piece of it, which I think is a little bit, it's an easy thing to do, it's a hard thing to achieve, right? Is making sure that we're opening up those applications like we talked about and encouraging people to apply no matter what situation they're in. So I know that all job postings right now are required to say, like, we have a diversity and inclusion statement. We're making sure that everyone, it's an equal opportunity employer, right? That's a standard thing that we put on all jobs whenever we put a job out there. What I would encourage tool suppliers to do, and manufacturers and anyone, is to put more on that piece of it, to say we encourage, or say LGBTQ&I individuals are encouraged to apply. People of color are encouraged to apply. We're working our best to make sure that we have strong diversity and inclusion in our organization.
Absolutely.
And frankly, the reason for it is twofold. Yes, it's great because diversity of individuals means diversity of thought and better problem solving. But also at the end of the day, you're opening up your jobs for more people to potentially apply to give you more workers. It's solving the age-old problem that every single tool supplier I talk to every day complains to me about. We just got to open up the amount of people that we're encouraging to apply for these jobs. But you're right. I mean, it's a hard thing to figure out, and it's not going to be solved overnight either, but we have to work towards it. And I understand your point about being old white guys in the industry. Not that I would call them that firsthand, but I'm going
to be very
soon
guy. There too. So, hey.
I do. Sometimes I tell them they're going a little bit gray. And part of the reason why that's so concerning, and we pointed out, albeit maybe slightly bluntly, is because if you look at our data, we have an aging workforce. The average age of a tool owner is about 64 years old right now. And that exact same group of people told us that only 42% of them have a succession plan.
My problem is in the news and everywhere else. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. When we go on Amazon, there's a lot of Amazon has been the greatest tool throughout COVID and well before that. And a lot of the products that we have inside the marketplace come from China, of course. There's a lot of production that's happening over there. And of course, now with the supply chain and when I look at the docks in California, as well as the docks in South Carolina, they're all backed up. There's a lot of goods on there. I've got companies that are waiting for their machines that come from overseas, and they're not getting them. And so, of course, all the news cycles are saying, well, we need to produce here. Great. Let's produce them here. Let's make our chips ourselves. Let's do all of this. But the problem was 20 years ago or 15 years ago, when somebody came up with this beautiful idea, oh, let's go to China and build everything over there and we can get it a lot cheaper. All of our experienced workers, and now what you're saying, a lot of our gray, white-haired, experienced, knowledgeable person are going to be retiring or have retired here soon too. How are we going to rebuild that workforce again in order that we can produce here, because we don't have the expertise anymore? And what we're doing now too at OESA, and what we have, I mean, I'm coming back to the OESA conference again because it was such a great event. A lot of good ideas happened there. But one of the items was too, in order to make sure, because of that shortage of labor force, because of all the experienced workers are retiring, companies are doing more and more and more to retain the labor force that they currently have, because they don't want to have them go for a buck more somewhere else. And obviously that cost needs to come from somewhere. And that cost is going to go potentially onto the product level. And at the end, the consumer is going to pay more because of that shortage that we're having. How are we going to combat all of those? I mean, this is now a huge package I just talked about with the supply and demand of the supply chain issues, as well as retaining personnel. And then these are three big issues that we're running ourselves into.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple opportunities there for potential solutions or ways to combat the issue, but you're right. I mean, it's a big problem and it's not going to be solved quickly. I think a big part of it, though, is just this opportunity to get standard processes and procedures in place. And I know that's very consulting speak, right? It's great to be a consultant. I can go in and tell them to put standard processes in place and then not necessarily help them do it. That's the running joke. But the point behind that is, realistically, what has to happen, to your point that we have people retiring who have all this tribal knowledge, is we have to get what they know out on paper, and we have to get it into our ERP systems and into our design libraries. I had a tool supplier tell me the other day, it was him and his lead designer and also his head of sales, or his lead quoter, and his head of sales sitting in an office. And he said to me, look, this guy can look at a RFQ and at a design, and then he can tell me how much it's going to cost within like $20,000 in the matter of 10 minutes. And I said, well, that's great, but that guy's 62. So that guy's going to go away at some point soon, right? I don't mean he's going to pass away, don't misunderstand me, but he's going to want to retire and spend time with his family. So what has to happen is we have to have some semblance of automated design libraries and automated quote systems that allow us to take the knowledge out of that guy's head and put it onto our systems. We have to do the exact same thing on your shop floors, right? So we've talked a lot. I know, Michael, you and I have talked before about task-based manufacturing. So it's this opportunity to say, okay, we've got a lot of things that go into building a tool. We have a lot of things that are very simple, drilling a water line, et cetera, to much more detailed things and making sure that everything's spotted well and all of that. So why are we sitting here today and saying, okay, so we have one tool supplier who's accountable for the entire process? Why aren't we taking that really, really smart guy that you're talking about that might be retiring in the next 10 years and saying, okay, I want you to spend your time on this most complicated part, and then I want you and your team to train all these other younger people who are coming in as we hire them on all these other pieces of it. And then what you, Mr. Lead Toolmaker, have to do is you have to look throughout all of these younger people and people who are learning the system and say, okay, this guy clearly has a propensity to figure out what I'm doing. Let's take some time and train them on the most complicated pieces of building a mold. But to your point, if we're hiring people and we're bringing people in who don't have mold making experience or die making experience and saying, okay, you can go sweep the floors until you figure out how to build a mold, they're not going to stick around, right? We're not going to retain them. They're going to go elsewhere. So we have to create a system on our shop floors that allow them to be trained by these seasoned people that are highly intelligent and keep all of it in their heads today in order to let them go do what they want to do with their futures and still keep manufacturing here in North America, because at the end of the day, that's what we want. It helps our economy if we think from a broad economic perspective. And it also helps give people great jobs that we need in order for them to consistently be able to spend more money because inflation is going up, like you talked about, and all those kinds of things.
It is so refreshing, and I've not heard this yet before from anywhere else about automating. I mean, this must be a brand new term, automation and all of this. Of course, I'm kidding, guys. It is not. I mean, this is an item that on almost every single episode that we've done so far, we're trying to hammer this into companies. I mean, 10 years ago when we brought this up, or maybe even longer than this with Tevis, you need to automate, you need to standardize your processes. And people were looking at us as if we're from Mars and saying, oh, you guys are off your rocker. We can't do this. We're a job shop. We never do the same things over and over again, blah, 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 blah. And now we're in this situation. And believe it or not, and I'm going to put a plug in here for Tevis, for the last year and I'm going to say 2 years, we've been more busy doing a lot of these automating and standardizing, utilizing virtual machines. This term digital twin has been put onto the forefront where everybody's looking at, okay, how can I program completely in my technological environment, in my computer, for all my machines, completely offline, have everything in place with my clamping devices, with my machines, know everything what's going on, MES system and so forth. And I can do this. And I can standardize and I can have consistent quality and consistent timing and all of these kind of things. We've been busier than ever before in this environment. And beforehand, people were just looking at us and saying, yeah, you guys are nuts.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Michael, and I think it's something that's been talked about for a while, but I would encourage people that are listening to hear something slightly different than maybe what you've heard every other time, because clearly just talking about automation doesn't get things automated, right? You have to actually do the work. So there's this big piece of it right now, which is, you're right, everybody's so busy that they're saying there's no way in heck I can focus on automation. I just have to get these tools out on time or as close to on time as possible, because let's be honest, most tools aren't going out on time right now anyway. Mm-hmm. But what we can do is we can think about the fact that, okay, at least Harbour and other sources have put a forecast out there that says demand is going to be pretty strong for at least the next 5 years. So it's putting us in a positive position going forward. But what will also happen is that this massive increase in demand that we felt over the last 12 months will slow down a little bit. I don't mean it'll go downhill, right? I don't mean that we're going to lose potential business, but we're not going to keep increasing at the 30% rate because it's not feasible. The economy can't the economy can't handle it. Manufacturing can't handle it. But what is that if not an opportunity for us to say, okay, we're going to take a breath in the first quarter of 2022, most likely. And then we're going to go into the second quarter and some of our supply chain issues are going to start to be figured out a little bit more. And maybe we'll be able to actually not get a couple new gray hairs for a few weeks, right? Because we're not firefighting as much in our businesses. So what is that if not the opportunity for us to say, okay, now's the time to go and automate more. Now's the time to do exactly what you're talking about. Because at the end of the day, we can make the plans all day long, but you've got to be able to go do the work. So I think, to your point about this being a perfect storm, yes, absolutely. In some capacities it is, but it's a perfect storm for us to focus on improvement and set ourselves up for success for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yep. There's a lot of opportunities to rethink the operation. Yesterday, I was at a client and he completely understood this. And he says, yes, right now I need to standardize. I need to rethink. And maybe this is a right time right now to make changes right now, because changes you don't make for just the right now, you make for the future. And if you don't make those changes in thinking of how can you get these things done, you might put yourself into a corner 5-10 years from now. Because if you don't start now with some of those items and prepare for all of this, you're going to run into a problem. And there's a huge opportunity. I agree with you. Yes, it looks pretty bleak right now, and sometimes it looks pretty dark too, especially when you go to your grocery stores and you can't find bacon anymore. And we all know bacon makes everything better.
As far as you're concerned, Michael, yes, bacon does make everything better.
Yes, since I have the microphone here, I'm saying bacon, bacon, bacon. But anyways, get away from that. But yes, it looks a little bit bleak, but there's a huge amount of opportunity that we can, and it's in our hands that we can turn this entire thing around. We can make or break our manufacturing sector, but we need to help out, and we need to do our portion of it by either training younger individual, getting them involved in our environment, implementing new technology, implementing automated procedures, making the process from inception to delivery a lot faster, so that we can kind of help out with this entire scenario.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think a part of that too, Michael, to your point about now's the time, right? A part of that is also coming up with a technology roadmap. And I would encourage people who have started hiring these 20 somethings to include them in the creation of that technology roadmap and that plan. So any good analyst who's going to talk to you about the rate of change will put this wonderful curve up in front of you that you can all Google that shows you the rate of change in adoption from everything from a color TV all the way to things like the iPhone and like a navigation system in your vehicle and all that kind of stuff. What's happened to us over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years is we have an expectation that technological advancements happen so much faster than they ever used to, right? I'm used to a new update coming out on my iPhone once a month at this point. So what that means as manufacturers is now when we're creating these plans for the future, it's important that we also have a technology plan to keep up with these technological shifts. And do you want to know what the best way to do that is? Is number one, to work with service providers as needed to have them help you and give you external points of view, but pull the young people in your organization in. Because if they're under the age of 30, they probably can't remember a day that they didn't have an iPhone sitting in their pocket. Do you want to know what they're going to do? They're going to figure out ways to help you advance your manufacturing industry the best way you possibly can with these increased technological advancements that are coming. I know we're working really closely with another service provider to make sure that we can help people create these technology roadmaps. And I mean, we have to do it at Harbour. You talked about the amount of data we have. We have so much data and information that we have to evolve the way we manage this data because new opportunities and new ways to manage it are coming out, frankly, every day. So it's a big thing.
And I need to say this too. I mean, a lot of this, a lot of it needs to also happen from our leaders over in Washington. I know Harbour Results with you, AMBA and OESA, PMA, you're doing a phenomenal job making sure that our leaders that are in Washington are doing the right things and holding them in check. But they need to also provide the manufacturers, especially in the automotive industry and the tool and die industry, to give them a chance to succeed, and not that we have companies that are going to be that have been 100 years or 80 years, whatever, in business, all of a sudden closing their doors because they can't hack it anymore. So we need to have our leaders in Washington really put their best foot forward and keep the manufacturing sector alive, because we can't just be a sales organization in the U.S. We have to be a manufacturing organization and a manufacturing powerhouse, because we have brilliant people that are doing the manufacturing.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think that to your point about what's happening in Washington, I know we at Harbour are not lobbyists. We don't want to be, right? But we work very closely with lobbyists, as you said, to make sure that lobbyists and those that are decision makers in Washington and in all of your state capitals have the data, have real data on the manufacturing industry. And I don't mean tier ones and OEMs. I mean the people who are listening to this, right? You're under $500 million shops. But I think the thing that is exciting, to your point about manufacturing going forward, is what COVID did partially is COVID outlined some of our reliance as a country, and frankly, as North America as a whole, on external countries like China to supply us with some of the goods that we need to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis, whether it be from a medical testing perspective or an electric vehicle perspective. And the current administration, and frankly, future administrations, I don't care whether they're Democratic or Republican, all are planning to have a vested interest in making sure manufacturing in North America is sustainable and is a powerhouse, to your point. Because at the end of the day, no matter which side of the aisle someone's sitting on, having a strong manufacturing base is good for the economy, it's good for middle income earners, and it's good at the end of the day for us to be the superpower that we want to be in this world. So I think it's an exciting path forward. But to your point, we got to make sure that we're putting the right data in front of these people who are making decisions so that they know which decisions most benefit this group of people.
Right. And you know what? Technology changes so fast. And especially in our manufacturing sector, when I walked into shops 25, 30 years ago, or whatever, and looked at what kind of machines were in there and looking now at what kind of technological wonders are now inside their shops, it is simply mind blowing. I mean, just alone, if I look at my own software that we have with Tebis, and I looked multiple years ago and what that looks like, I'm scratching my head and I'm going, oh wow, how could I utilize a program like this? And now look at the products that we have, and it's not just Tebis, it's everybody in the manufacturing industry with computers. It really has changed the way how we operate, the way how we manufacture, and it also shows in the quality that we can provide.
It's really cool, isn't it? I know we're talking about all these challenges, and it is something to be aware of, but at the end of the day, it's just awesome. Like if anybody hasn't been able to walk into a manufacturing facility lately, especially a mold builder, they are innovating in ways that are so cool. And at the end of the day, it's exciting, and it's really good stuff for us to think about. That's what gets me out of bed every day is that innovation and that excitement.
Exactly. I mean, I urge any kid or any high schooler or anything or anybody listening to this that are not in this industry, do yourself a favor. Look at and this was something that my college instructor in the plastics industry mentioned to me. Pick up a part that you have at your household. Look at it and kind of imagine, how was this manufactured? Think backwards of how this was, and then maybe visit one of the mold makers and die makers to see how these things are being produced. It is truly exciting how these things are happening. And Cara, I know I can talk to you forever on all these different topics because you're just such an insight on the things that are going on. You have your fingers on the pulse on what's going on in the manufacturing industry. In order to wrap this up, give our listeners who are listening to this maybe your insight or maybe a couple of points of what maybe they should be doing going forward in the future so that they can be this powerhouse that we're looking for.
Yeah, well, that's a loaded question, right? I got to tell them what I think is important. No, I think it's a couple of things. I think number one, to piggyback on your point about any young person who's in their home and looking at something and understanding how it's made, and then you said to go visit a mold or die shop, I would take the call to action one step further. If you're listening and you don't know how to go visit a mold or die shop, let Michael know or let me know, and we'll make sure you get into a mold or die shop. I have no doubt, Michael, that I could pick up the phone and call someone and they would love to have any young person take a tour of their facility, right? So just to get that one out of the way, I think that's super important. And I think along with that, one of the biggest things that a mold and die supplier or any small to medium-sized manufacturer can do first is that they can make sure that they're working with their local school systems, whether it be high school or trade school or community college. That's one of the best things to do that will allow you to get, frankly, in tune with what this next generation is looking for. And when I say next generation, I don't mean millennials, because frankly, the oldest millennial is 40. So they're probably already sitting in your facility or listening to this today. I mean this Gen Z population that's coming up next. They're the largest generation we've had in history. And what they need is very different than what anyone before them need. So get involved with your local states and your local officials to help understand what they want and how you can provide it in your facilities. And beyond that, I think, Michael, at the end of the day, the best thing that anybody can do is understand that, yes, this is a little bit of a perfect storm, but even when some of these things are solved, which will take time, something else is going to come up behind it. And I don't mean that to sound negatively, like it's a cause for concern, but what I mean is work to run your businesses with the chaos. Control what you can in your facilities today. So don't sit back and say, okay, once all these other things are solved, I'll do better. I'll automate my design libraries. I'll make sure that I implement task-based manufacturing. Don't wait, because I don't think that we can. To your point, we have a lot of external competition coming from places like China. We also have a challenge from a labor perspective. So waiting until these things are solved is just going to put us in a precarious situation. I'd much rather you say, here are all the things I can't control. Okay, let's put those aside. Here are the 10 things I can control, and let's go do the work today, rather than waiting and twiddling our thumbs until we have a situation where it's easier for us to do that work.
Well, Cara, once again, nice answers to a loaded question. And
Thanks,
It is always a pleasure talking to you, Cara. Hopefully we have you back on here again. Really, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us on the All Access podcast. Hopefully, more and more people are going to be listening to you and taking your advice.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity and love to do all things with Tebis. So happy to be on a future podcast or do what I can.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. To all of you guys that are still listening, let me just echo what Cara said. Get involved in what's going on. Yes, it may look like a perfect storm, but it could also be the perfect opportunity for you. If you are having questions, talk to the guys over at Harbour Results, talk to the guys over at Tebis. If you want to find out of how certain things are manufactured or are just a little bit an iota intrigued of how these things can be made here in the US, get in touch with us. We can get you involved in a lot of the different companies. And I know there's a lot of companies that are searching for new talent, for new ways of doing things. And some of the thoughts that you might bring into may completely revolutionize our manufacturing industry. So get in touch with us. Let's see how we can turn a bad situation into a better situation. And, if I look at the title of this episode that I have sitting in front of me, it says the current economy's impact on manufacturing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's change that. Let's make it the good and let's make it better. With that said, looking forward to talking to you next time. Thank you so much and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining this episode of All Access. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about manufacturing technology solutions and Tebis's capabilities, visit our website at Tebis. That's TEBIS.com.